So I think the first thing to say is that the Enough Coalition, along with a number of other partner organisations, decided to launch the Islamophobia Awareness Month it was about mid-October when we decided that November would become Islamophobia Awareness Month. And the real reason that we decided to launch the month and really kind of try and bring together loads of different organisations who are working on the issue was because we're very conscious of the rising Islamophobia, not just in the media but in political circles, and how that affects people on a very much a day-to-day basis. And if we just kind of take a step back and we look at the media, and this session is very much about humanitarian intervention and the war on terror, and if we look at how the discussion on the war on terror has become quite kind of normalised in the media, and we look at the things that the BBC might say or other media organisations, and we look at some of the daily newspaper headlines that we see, one of the things that we've noticed is the use of language. And very recently there was an exhibition done by a Muslim organisation called I Engage, and they looked at some of the language that was used, and they talked. One of the findings that they came up with was that every time the word Muslim is used, almost, I think it was something like 90% of the time, the word terror or criminal or a word that had negative connotations was almost certainly used either before or after the word Muslim. And it's these kinds of discussions on Muslims and on Islam which have certainly helped to frame Islamophobia and have helped to kind of strengthen far-right Islamophobic discussions in the UK. And so as the media goes on to blur the lines between what terrorism is and what the war on terror is and what Islam and Muslims are, it becomes quite easy to see why Islamophobia seems to be kind of a bit more apparent and a bit more normalised. So you'll have a report perhaps in the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Mail or any other newspaper. There are plenty of newspapers to choose from, sadly, where they will talk very widely about a terrorist organisation, and then they will quite quickly link that with a Muslim group, and they will say the Islamic terrorist organisation. The recent news items that we've seen over the last couple of days, where we've been watching what's been unfolding in the Gaza Strip, we've noticed how quickly the traditional media outlets have reverted back to describing Hamas as the terrorist organisation, neglecting the fact that Hamas were democratically elected, and neglecting to mention the fact that they are the government of Gaza, and often they're referred to as the terrorist group or the terrorists of Hamas, and that kind of language, when that gets normalised, you then see kind of this continued discussion of Muslims being terrorists, and it makes it much easier for people to then equate the two things, and then that language around bad Muslims becomes wider, and it means that Islamophobia, in a sense, is a much easier market. It is a much easier product to market. It's a much easier thing to promote. And so you see, for example, the Rochdale case, where this has nothing to do with terrorism and it has nothing to do with the wars that we've seen over the last 10 years. But what you see is the first thing that people are talking about is the fact that you've got a group of Muslim men. And for some reason, that becomes a really important part of the story, not the fact that there's actually a real criminal gang going on and there are some really terrible, heinous crimes. So as you continue to demonise Muslims, you allow this Islamophobia to develop. At the Enough Coalition, we feel that Islamophobia has kind of reached extraordinarily worrying heights in Britain. We've got racist and fascist groups like the English Defence League pushing a thesis of hatred, adding to the climate of fear that's being developed, and suspicion about Muslims and amongst the general British society tends to be creeping. Islamophobic prejudice is prevalent in the mainstream, and it's very difficult to deny that. And we see it not only on display in the media, but also in political life, in the police forces across the country, sadly, and in the courts. interestingly, we noticed at our launch, one of the interesting points was that although the London Metropolitan Police Force do record Islamophobic crimes as Islamophobic, specifically that's a term, there isn't any other police force in the country that does that. And one of the concerns that was raised by a member of the audience who was just a Londoner, so could report it, but one of her concerns was, I don't know where to turn to, and I don't know who to report this crime to, this Islamophobic crime that I'm witnessing. And that kind of alienation adds to this kind of growing trend of diversion between these two groups, where you've got the Muslims who are being targeted and you've got those doing the targeting. And there is no way that at the moment that these two groups are being brought together. So we decided to set up Islamophobia Awareness Month, as I've already mentioned, and we thought that it would be a really good way to try and deconstruct and challenge some of the stereotypes about Islam and Muslims. We've brought together a number of prominent organisations. I've mentioned the Enough Coalition Against Islamophobia, I Engage. It's also worth mentioning that the Muslim Council of Britain have been involved, the Federation of Students' Islamic Societies are involved, and there are a few other organisations, but I can't remember them all. But the important thing is that it's not just about one or two particular types of organisations. It's about all of these different organisations coming together under one banner to really challenge what is going on and the Islamophobia that we've become quite accustomed to seeing. The idea behind the Islamophobia Awareness Month is very new, and it's something that will need to be developed, and we hope that, we don't obviously want to have Islamophobia going on for the next few years. Ideally, we'd all like to see it being eradicated tomorrow, but that's not realistic. So whilst Islamophobia continues to play a worrying force in British society and in wider society, we hope that the Islamophobia Awareness Month will be a way for people to come together and really campaign really quite strongly on the issues of Islamophobia, be that in the media, be that in political circles. So whether that's writing to your local newspaper, whether that's talking to your local MPs, getting involved in a local community organisation. And essentially what we hope is that initiatives like the Islamophobia Awareness Month and other initiatives, and we're really conscious that this shouldn't just be something that happens 1 month of the year. This is, the Enough Coalition has been something that's been going for about a year and a half now, and we're really conscious that we can really build on it, and we really want to make this a movement that will really develop and grow and really start to combat some of the negative stereotypes that are really common in the media and in political life about Muslims. So essentially that's why the Enough Coalition exists. That's what the Islamophobia Awareness Month is about. And I think today's conference is really important because it is really important to remember how the language about Islam, how the discourse of Islamophobia has been helped, if that's the right word, by the war on terror, by the media's use of the war on terror and how it's depicted and normalised this kind of a demonisation of Muslims. Get involved if you can. If you are interested in getting more information, please email us. Come and speak to any of us at the end of the meeting. And also, I think the most important thing to take away from this is to take it back to your universities, to your local organisations, to where you work, and to really get the discussions going and to really start to engage with how we can combat what is a really big problem.